And while the record companies scramble to shut Napster down, one thing becomes very clear. The digital music revolution has begun. Back at Apple, Steve Jobs sees an opportunity.
Once it dawned on Steve and his executives that this thing was happening on the internet with music, they knew that they had been missing an opportunity. They did photos, movies, and it was really not until a second iteration of the iMac that the iMac became something that you could burn CDs on and use music on.
Steve knew that Napster was a giant success. He knew that this was happening. Steve was looking for some way to manage songs, manage music. He wanted Apple users to have a product that enabled you to take your CDs, put them into a Mac, rip the song, and play them back.
Apple found, a company which was actually populated by former Apple people that made a product called SoundJam. And SoundJam was taken in, and within a few months, they transformed that program into something that looked like a Mac program, and that was called iTunes.
In January 2001, Steve Jobs takes the stage at the Macworld Expo in San Francisco to announce iTunes, Apple's jukebox software and first step into the digital music space.
Steve Jobs' keynote presentation is like a Rolling Stone show.
Thank you all for coming.
You may have seen a lot over the years, but you never want to miss one. In the year 2001, he came to Macworld and brought iTunes, which was the first Macintosh jukebox. This was something that really pushed the limits of what a jukebox could do. It was more beautiful, it was easier to use than anything either on the Macintosh certainly, but also in the Windows world. And you knew right then that Apple was deep in the game in digital music.
To us, at its core, it's all about the music.
For Steve, music was the natural thing. It was the perfect synthesis for Apple because Steve understood that music was part of our DNA. I mean, computer, let's be honest, it's sort of a 20th century thing. Typing on a keyboard and looking at a screen, and it's not an intuitive, primal thing. Music is a primal thing. It's something that's been with human beings since drums in the jungle. So, this was something where if he could pull it off right, he could take the digital world, marry it to that primal thing, and make something really important.
It would be that very idea that would soon change Apple forever. Since his return in 1996, Steve Jobs had brought his company back from the grave. And in January 2001, he made Apple a player in the digital music revolution by launching iTunes. Now, the iPod begins to take shape.
iTunes was a way to move your files around and to organize your files on your computer. But what did you really want to do? You wanted to be able to wander around with the songs. You want to be tethered to your desk. You want to go jogging. Steve realized this, and he sent his team out to look at the MP3 marketplace. And what was available was not anything that any of them would like. In fact, they stank.
There was a flash-based one from Diamond, the Rio. There was the Eiger MP Man, the first MP3 player. There was one hard drive-based player from Compaq. But they were expensive, and people really didn't know about them.
What was fascinating was that the one electronics company that should have figured it out, Sony, had completely dropped the ball. Sony, who had built the original portable music player that became a worldwide phenomenon, had completely missed this market.
When Napster opened the door, everybody in the business should have said, holy smoke, here's this huge opportunity. How do we service this audience?
Now, Steve knew that Sony didn't have this product. They hadn't figured it out. He thought, wow, there's a real opportunity here. We could build something better than anybody's got.
By early 2001, Apple is determined to get into the MP3 player market. An independent engineer named Tony Fadell is trying to do the same.
Apple at the time was looking to get into the MP3 player market, and along came this independent contractor, Tony Fadell. He'd worked at Philips and General Magic, and he'd been developing handheld devices for them. And his idea was to make a hard drive MP3 player that was also tied to an online store.
Apple wanted to build an MP3 player, and I think Steve had already decided this was a fertile area. So there's this guy, Tony Fadell, around who's got an idea. The guys at Apple decided, look, we could either build it ourselves, take a year or two to get it out there. Or just like we started iTunes with SoundJam's design, we could put our own magic around it, and we could have a product out in a much more rapid time frame.
In the same month Apple launches iTunes, Steve makes a decision that changes the course of Apple forever: to create the iPod. Under heavy secrecy, Apple quickly assembles a team to develop the device in a near impossible time frame. Steve wants it ready for the holiday season, just 9 months away.
The Apple iPod development schedule was about 9 months, and it was extremely tense. There was no pizza parties. It was show up on Saturday, show up on Sunday, work all week. It was a very, very tight schedule. So about a month into the project, we fly down to Cupertino to meet with the Apple folks. There's about maybe a dozen of the Apple executives in the room. And Tony Fadell storms into the room and he says, "Folks, this is the project that's going to remake Apple. In 10 years, this is going to be a music business, not a computer business."
Initially, Steve Jobs wasn't that involved until it started to come together. And towards the end, the meetings went from weekly to daily, and he became very, very involved.
Steve used to give a lot of feedback on the audio. He has a very gifted knack for detecting harmonics. He could tell you right away if it sounds good, if it doesn't sound good. He would give reports back to us that the buttons weren't clicking fast enough, or you couldn't get to the song you wanted in less than 3 clicks.
If you know a Steve Jobs product, you know that he likes simplicity. The very first Macintosh, for instance, had no cursor keys, even though every computer should have cursor keys. Similarly, he didn't want an off switch on the iPod. He wanted the fewest switches possible.
Especially in the polishing and the design, the aesthetics, the use, the interface. His personality is all over that. I mean, it was that typical Steve Jobs insistence on the best experience.
But with just 3 months to go before launch, the iPod development hits a snag.
Towards the end of the development cycle, they were setting up the factories to make the thing, and they discovered that they had a problem with the power management.
About 3 months before the end of the project, we find out that the iPod is going dead after about 3 hours, even when it's turned off. And that battery life just isn't acceptable. The mood around the office was that we either fixed it or we might as well go home.
For 8 stressful weeks, the engineers scrambled to fix the problem, and finally it's solved. After months of around-the-clock work, the iPod is ready. Steve sends an email to the press, inviting them to come to the launch of a new Apple product. Teasing them, it simply reads, "Hint, it's not a Mac." On October 23, 2001, Steve takes the stage to unveil his latest creation.
The iPod introduction was another great moment of Steve. He shows up and he says, I've got this new thing I'm going to show you today, but I'm not going to bring it out right yet. And he kind of wanders around the stage and he whets the appetite, and he reaches into his pocket and pulls out the iPod.
There it is, right there.
He says, this is the first day in a whole new revolution.
This amazing little device holds 1,000 songs, and it goes right in my pocket.
The place was filled with journalists who all looked at this and were going, what is this? Nobody really knew what he was up to.
No one was really expecting them to come out with an MP3 player.
It is now accessible to everybody to have 1,000 songs and find them and navigate them faster.
They basically just made it an incredibly easy to grasp proposition for most people.